Oh, this is the most dangerous sentence that you can hear from anyone. And not just coffee, but like, it applies to like business, it applies to politics, it applies to a lot of things. Of course, like you got to respect tradition, you've got to understand where things came from, but the ability to also challenge the status quo, I think, is really important.
I think that's a very key factor in every aspect of life, especially given the context of what we're talking about, coffee competitions and finding excellence in that. The evolution of this may rapidly progress in 5 years, and that will be something that will adapt and have an open mind to adapt. But if we had a magic 8 ball, what do you think is the next big thing in competition coffee? Hey guys, Jeff Rambo here, and this man needs no introduction, but Simon, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself, so tell the world who you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon Gautherin. I'm one of the co-founders of Apex Lab. We make mineral concentrates for coffee, and I'm also the 2026 Australian Brewers Cup champion.
And hopefully the soon-to-be world champion, and I have a high level of confidence in that, because this man knows the secret sauce and it's right here in front of us. But that's one of the many things that we're going to be talking about today on this inaugural episode of Champion Conversations, which was an idea that I had when I flew back from Seoul, South Korea this past December, when I competed in the World AeroPress Championship after winning the 2025 American Championship, where I realized on that long flight back to LA before we came back down to San Diego, we had so many national winners on that stage in Seoul, and they were all competing at such a high level where they had their routines dialed in, they had their recipes dialed in, they had their schedules dialed in. And I realized that when you're competing on that stage, you have to just be laser focused. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you might as well just throw the towel in the ring right then and there. So I had this idea for having a peer level interview type series where people that took this competition scene, be it Brewers Cup, AeroPress, Latte, Barista, it doesn't matter, even cupping, where we take it seriously, but talking about the things that go into it to make it possible to say, hey, I am a world champion, or I'm someone competing for a world championship. And while we were off camera, we had an interesting conversation about the one-to-one comparison of sports to coffee competitions. And I thought that was a really good analogy, because you hear guys that tell stories about Kobe Bryant. And one of the things that was just consistent from story to story to story was Kobe was in the gym at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. The rest of the team, they're coming in the gym at 9, 10, 11, and they're like, wait, Kobe was in the gym getting up shots at 4, 5, 6 in the morning? And that's why he was the Black Mamba. That's why he's one of the most fierce competitors out there. But it was laying the groundwork of that to set up himself on that stage at the national or the world level to just always win. Because if you put the practice in, we train how we fight, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So how would you say that relates to coffee competition, Simon?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the last few years is that there's definitely a massive momentum for coffee competitions. So people are really enjoying coffee competitions. We see more people signing up for these competitions regardless of the category. And that's a global phenomenon.
Right.
So I remember, especially in Europe, maybe 6 to 10 years ago, there's only a handful of people competing in each country.
Right.
And now most European countries have 48, 50, all the way to maybe 70 competitors in each category in some cases. Right. And so there's a massive momentum. More people are interested in competing than ever, and it obviously becomes more competitive.
Right.
And so you need to find a way to get a competitive advantage. And for some people, it is practicing extremely regularly. So sort of having that Kobe Bryant, or even Michael Phelps, I think is a really good example of, he's practiced every single day, did not skip one single training for something like 8 to 7 years. And that made him the greatest Olympian of all time.
Most decorated of all time.
100%.
Sure.
And so this kind of discipline is something that we can borrow from other industries, other sports, other sort of competition field, and then apply that to coffee. And we're also seeing things you probably noticed that when you went to Seoul for the World AeroPress Championship, some competitors flew with an entire team, with multiple people. They had the logistics sorted out already. There's maybe one person dedicated to logistics exclusively. So it's not a one-person show. Right. And I think this is one of the pitfall when people look at coffee from the outside, they look at coffee competition. Obviously, there's one person on stage, but there's a whole team that's behind that person.
Right, that you rarely see, but they're just as important, if not more important.
Absolutely, and so I guess a good analogy is like Formula One. When you think about Formula One, you've got two drivers per team, but it's 200 to 300 people working in these teams.
Right.
And obviously, you only see one person racing, but there's a whole bunch of people behind. And if you look at things like track running, for example, like any sort of like professional athletes would have a physio, you'd have like two coaches, social media person, maybe someone else running the logistics. Like there's a whole team behind every single competitor. And we're starting to see that a lot more with coffee. We're starting to see that all of the big teams, so if you look at the top sort of finalists for last year's World Brewers Cup Championship, there's no one that just literally rock up on the road.
By themselves.
At least like 3 to 5 people in each team, almost sort of like full-time working on that competition as a team for several weeks or several months.
And that's definitely where we see things going from our perspective as well. And that's why after the national AeroPress Championship here, it's cool to hoist that trophy or that cup or whatever the case may be in the respective categories. But when we came back to San Diego, I said, you know what, this was a team effort, so we're going to put that trophy here in the shop, because if it weren't for the team, this wouldn't happen. And it's definitely cool to see, as we're here for World of Coffee 2026, we're getting a lot of the latte art champions coming into our cafe to practice, and they're coming with their coaches, they're coming with their travel coordinators, they're coming with their national bodies that are supporting them at scale. And it's awesome to see, because I've been that person, as you have as well, alone competing in a competition, and you're sourcing your water from here, your coffee from here. Where am I going to practice? Where am I going to do this? And you're like, oh crap, I don't know. So it's nice to have a team to be able to sort that stuff out, to where you can just be laser focused on, hey, this is my routine, this is what I'm going to get dialed in, I'm going to get my sleep properly scheduled.
Sleep to me is one of the biggest things, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I make sleep a priority. Sleep, exercise, diets. These are the top 3 things that I want to make sure are on point, in the 30 days before any competition. And I want to make sure that I sleep 8 to 10 hours a night. I know it sounds a bit extreme, because I know that there's a higher chance that in the last 2-3 days of the competition, I get to sleep less.
Yes.
Or there's some, curveballs, and we have to stay up a bit longer to try and download the coffee. And if you get to the competition already tired, you're cooked.
You're good.
You're done. Yeah. And the ability to have that resilience, the ability to have like an exceptional resilience, thanks to having sort of like a sleep credit or having a really healthy lifestyle, I think really helps with both stress management and clarity of thoughts when it comes to making really tough decisions.
Definitely.
Because you probably face that in the World AeroPress Championship, where you're down to maybe the last 2 doses, and the coffee isn't tasting quite there yet. So the coffee is not exactly necessarily where you want it to be.
Totally.
But you have to make a really tough call in terms of what is the next recipe we're going to try? What's the next variable that we're going to test in order to improve that coffee? And you need that mental clarity.
You definitely do. And I think the mental clarity is obviously first and foremost to make those decisions that on the fly, especially like you said, where you're down to 1 to 2 doses, which is very interesting for a different conversation, where for the World AeroPress Championship specifically, we were allowed to use 2 coffees originally, and we're dialing in those 2 coffees, but then at the last minute we find out, oh crap, we can't use that coffee. So now we have a certain amount of that other coffee that we can use, and it did come down to that point where it's like, oh crap, I like this recipe, but this one's slightly better.
Yeah.
But you mentioned sleep. For me, diet's a big thing, because the palate fatigue as well as the palate overload of having eaten or not eaten can also have a big effect. And it was very interesting, because I was in LA prior to the regional? No, this was prior to the national championship. I was in LA briefly before flying up to San Francisco, and I stopped at Kumquat downtown Los Angeles. And surprisingly, Esther happened to be on bar. And for those of you who don't know, Esther Kim went on to win the U.S. Brewers Cup Championship this year. Phenomenal coffee professional. But I asked her, Esther, we competed in the April Brewers Cup earlier this year, and she went on to win. What did you have for breakfast that day? And she looked at me like, wait, what? And it caught her off guard. I was like, no, I was just curious. What did you have for breakfast that morning? And, she was trying to rack her brain as to what she had. And if I remember correctly, I actually think she said she had white rice, if I recall correctly, for breakfast that morning. Or maybe it might have been the previous night. That was the last thing that she ate. But either way, having a solid dietary routine just as much as a solid sleep routine is 100% important. So it definitely is worth mentioning that and worth taking that into consideration. But it's very interesting that you use the not just the sports comparison, but the Michael Phelps comparison, because we all know Michael Phelps, one of the greatest Olympians to ever grace the podium, but water is his world, and that's your world. So, Simon, tell us about what might be the secret sauce to a lot of the national and world champions out there.
Yeah, so water chemistry or water for coffee has been it's a rabbit hole that I went really deep into over maybe like 8 years ago now. I very quickly realized that water was super important to coffee, and that whether we brewed coffee in Sydney, I'm originally from Paris, but I've lived in Sydney for the last 10 years.
Okay.
And I realized that when I brewed the same coffee in Paris or in Sydney, or then went to Melbourne, using the same equipment, the coffee was tasting extremely different. And I realized that was due to the water that I was using, and I wanted to understand what specifically in that water makes it taste different. And obviously it's the dissolved solids inside of the water, namely the minerals that you can find inside it. And I went on this journey to really understand how the different minerals that you can find in your water impact coffee.
Okay.
In order to understand how a given water, so if you look at a spec sheet of the water, how that given water might make coffee taste, and also if you were to sort of like reverse engineer everything, if you were to recreate a water from scratch, so from dry mineral powders, how to blend these different mineral powders, like how much of each different one to use, and also which one to select.
Right.
And so in that process, I realized that water was a lot more than one variable. It's actually a whole ingredient to when we make coffee.
Totally.
So we spend so much time sourcing coffee, roasting coffee, just looking at coffee itself, obviously, because we needed to do brewed coffee.
Right.
But we're using a second ingredient, which is water, and the minerals inside of that water are fundamental to make a great brew. And not only just fundamental to make a great brew, but they are, in my opinion, so the mineral composition of water is most likely the single most impactful, replicable, and predictable variable, or if you treat it as a variable in coffee. Okay. So that means that when you replicating the same water, you'll have the same results. And you can easily predict what that result is going to be, which means this, as a variable, changing around the mineral composition is an extremely powerful lever when it comes to changing your coffee.
Okay.
So let's say you want your coffee to be a bit sweeter and have more body and reduce the acidity. If you look at a variable like grind size, if you go a bit finer or a bit coarser, you'll have so many things change all over the place.
Right.
And it's not as it's definitely powerful, but it's not really it's not always replicable, and it's not very predictable at all.
Okay.
A lot of things would change. But whereas with minerals, you have this ability to really fine-tune every single attribute in a much more precise and predictable way.
Okay.
And so I went on to create basically products that are blends of different minerals that highlight very specific things in coffee, that do a very targeted job. And yeah, a lot of people ended up using the products, winning a lot of national championship, world championships. We launched 2 years ago, and we've had 5 people win a world championship with our products, and 350, close to 380 national champions now.
Very nice.
And a lot of cafes also behind the bar found that being able to change the mineral composition of their water was a really strong, powerful tool in order to make better tasting coffee, or to highlight different expressions of that same coffee.
Definitely. And one of the awesome cafes that I love visiting here in San Diego, Rica Fica, they're starting to do post-mineralization for their pour-over program, and I thought that was super cool. So it's nice to see this start entering into the space in that realm. But interestingly enough, you mentioned Apex has been behind 5 world champions, and one of those was Nemo Pop, the 2026 AeroPress champion, the World AeroPress champion.
One of your competitors.
One of my competitors, yes. And I really loved competing with Nemo, and seeing his routine was quite interesting. And you kind of shed a little light on it just now with grind size, because I know you're getting it from both sides right now on the internet about grinding coarse, and we're Team Grind Coarse here as well.
Oh, cool! Music to my ears.
Yes, we're Team Grind Coarse here as well. But would you say, with so many different variables being able to be changed, whereas this is something that you can replicate time after time after time again, is that one of the reasons why you do you grind coarser now? Because
so a couple of reasons why we grind coarse, and when I say coarse, I think for most people, it would be unbelievably coarse. So on an EK43, the coarsest setting doesn't go coarse enough for what we do.
Gotcha.
On a Comandante grinder, which most people are familiar with, we do around like 34, 35 clicks.
Okay.
Which is, pretty coarse.
Yeah.
The reason, two things. I guess like one thing is we never change the grind setting.
Okay.
Once we have a grinder and we pick that grinder and if all we're doing is the same like brewing method, we'll never change the grind size.
Okay.
Which surprises most people, but the reason for that is because when you have your given recipe, let's say, you brew behind the bar with your Oria, your base recipe for any coffee should be 80% good. Okay. Like you're probably yielding 80% of that coffee's potential, regardless of the coffee you're using, because you've worked that recipe
so many times.
You know it really well.
Right.
So sometimes you'll get closer to 90%. Sometimes you'll be at around 80%. And I think those last 20%, you're not necessarily improving your coffee much by changing the grind size. Okay. You might want to look at other other variables that will fine tune that result. And because grind size is one of these really powerful, it's like a wild horse. Like you change a little bit, and let's say you just wanted to get a bit more body out of your coffee, you go a bit finer, then you start to get dryness, then you start to get a bit more bitterness, the acidity is reduced. So yeah, you got more body, but you also create 4 other problems.
Right.
And so I find that there are other variables out there that can be more precise than that.
Okay.
Now the reason why we grind coarse is for 2 reasons. First reason, when you're grinding coarse, you tend to have a better clarity of flavors. You tend to have cups that are easier to read and a better quality of acidity. The problem with coarse grinds, though, is that you usually have too much acidity, and the coffee can be a bit too weak. So not enough body, not enough intensity, and too much acidity. That's usually the problem.
Okay.
The great news is that not enough body, too much acidity, not enough intensity, these are 3 things that are super easy to fix
right there
with water.
Yes.
Water is really good at adding extra body, controlling the acidity, and giving overall more intensity. And so it means that if I'm grinding really coarse, I have those cups that are very sort of like aromatic, very delicate, they're very refined, but they just like a bit of intensity. And to be honest, like I don't like to drink coffee that tastes like tea.
Right.
I know some people do.
Yeah, totally.
So I like it when there's really good intensity of my coffee, but I personally have better results when I grind coarse and when I use a lot more minerals in my water to lift up the intensity, to give a lot of creaminess, not from extracting more out of the coffee, but from getting that intensity from the minerals. Okay. And so it's essentially, the philosophy is essentially don't extract too much out of your coffee, because as you push your extraction, you start to also get into the dangerous territory of, we have a bit of bitterness, we have a bit of astringency, like those higher extraction brews, they tend to be extremely like bitter and dry. Okay. And so being able to sort of like pull back the extraction and then compensate the shortcomings with water has been a really, I think, easy and intuitive way for us to dial coffee. But if you look at most people who competed in the AeroPress and he did really well, or same thing in Brewers Cup, I can guarantee that no one's grinding fine.
Right.
Like no one is. And I think this is kind of like something that within the circles of competition, everybody's known that for a long time, but there's a lot of people, I think, on the internet that are still really surprised to see people grind that coarse. But I can guarantee you that, most people go for lower extraction levels and coarse grinds. This is something that, it's the worst kept secret within the competition spheres.
I would agree so. I would definitely agree so. And I think that more so with the internet space, a lot of it is, hey, I learned this so many years ago in this space or in this medium, so I read it in a book or I read it on the internet, becomes the gold standard of what we must do things by.
Yeah.
But it's not, because we've shown time after time, like, hey, there are national champions, there are world champions that are doing the exact opposite of what the books or the internet says to do, and we're proving some of these gold standard philosophies or concepts to be wrong.
Yeah. And by all means, like what we're talking about right now, it honestly could be completely false in 5 years.
True.
And then I think we just have to have the ability to be like, okay, well, someone's found a way to make coffee taste better in a different way by using fine grinds. I revisit that honestly every 6 months, and I really try to, test what a few people are doing, and I still can't get better results than what I'm, currently doing. But again, like if that changes in the future, I think I'd be really excited to revisit these techniques.
Totally.
I think most people are just it takes so much to be out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
And so at some point you're kind of like happy to be settled into, this is what I do and it works well for me.
Right.
And if someone comes in and says, no, there's a much better way to do it, and then here's how I'm proving that to you, it becomes very unsettling. And I think some people don't have the I mean, there are people with insecurities about how they brew, and they
Yes.
definitely are not happy to be challenged that way.
No, totally. And I think one of the greatest limiting aspects of furthering the advancement of coffee is just simply saying, this is how we've always done it.
Oh,
And
this is the most dangerous sentence that you can
Totally.
hear from anyone.
Totally.
And not just coffee, but like, it applies to like business, it applies to politics, it applies to a lot of things. And
Oh, totally.
that makes of course, like you got to respect tradition, you've got to understand like how, where things came from, but then the ability to also like challenge the status quo, I think is really important.
No, I think that's a very key factor in life, every
Yeah.
aspect of life, but especially given the context of what we're talking about, coffee competitions for
100%.
sure, and finding the excellence in that. So, as you said, the evolution of this may rapidly progress in 5 years, and that will be something that will adapt and
Yeah.
have an open mind to adapt. But if we had a magic 8 ball, what do you think is the next big thing in competition coffee?
That's a really good point. This is something that I constantly like take a lot of time to try and think. Where is the next breakthrough coming from? I think we've seen a lot of innovation in processing coming from coffee producers, also varieties as well. If we look at coffee in coffee production, probably in farming practices, so agronomy. So how do we grow healthier trees that yield healthier fruits?
Right.
Not so much like trying to fix everything, and in the post-harvest processing or trying to use better genetics. Initially, it's more like controlling the environment.
Correct.
And not just relying on, terroir is obviously the environment in which you grow things, but human can have a major impact
Right.
on that. So
Definitely
from a
impact.
coffee production, I think there's a big improvement to do on that. From a roasting point of view, I think using fresher roasted coffee, green beans is going to be the next sort of like breakthrough. We talk about fresh roasted coffee a
Right,
lot
versus resting.
and then so aging your roasted coffee a little bit more, but also using fresher green coffee.
Okay.
So if you're using old grain, your roasts are going to age extremely fast.
Right.
And there's one person right now in Colombia that's really showcasing that roasted coffee can age really long if you use fresh green, and that's Carlos Escobar from Diferente Coffee.
Yes.
He's a really good friend of mine from a long time ago. We used to live in Sydney together, and he's now gone back to Colombia. He's got his own roasting business called Diferente Coffee, and all the green he sources is extremely fresh. And when you roast his coffee extremely fresh, you can drink the roast like 4, 5, 6 months later, and it still tastes fantastic. And I'm not even joking. Like the coffee still tastes like it would, it'd be like a month old.
I believe you because Carlos roasted your winning
he
coffee,
did.
right?
Yeah.
And
He
I
always roasts all my coffees.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I still had probably about 10 grams of each of the coffees that you sent me
Yeah.
about a week ago, and it was still delicious.
And you didn't freeze it or anything like that.
Just
Yeah.
kept it in the tin.
And
it
that would
was
have been
delicious.
like, what, almost 6 months ago?
Yeah, that was about 6 months ago. So
Maybe
yeah.
more, because he roasted like the coffee was at 4 or 5 weeks already for the competition or
Okay.
something like that. So
yeah.
over 6 months
Yeah,
ago.
definitely coming up probably
Yeah.
on like 7.5, 8 months then.
Yeah, and
because-
so that could be one of the improvements I think from roasting. And in brewing, I definitely think that we're going to see more and more people gravitating towards slightly lower extraction. So shorter ratios, coarser grind size, maybe less agitation as well. I think you're going to see the average sort of like extraction level of coffee reducing, because you get to, you'll get a lot less dryness, a lot less bitterness. If we notice people are chasing less dryness, less bitterness, more sweetness, more clarity in their coffee, you definitely want to have like less extraction, less compounds into the cup. Like clarity is one of these things that people have been really obsessed over for a long time, because
Right.
I think clarity in the cup allows people to connect with it.
Right.
If I serve a coffee to you that tastes like strawberry, and I tell you, it tastes like strawberry, and you go,
There-
wow,
yeah.
it actually tastes like
Yes.
strawberry. But if I say it tastes like strawberry, and you go,
not so much.
maybe, not so much, exactly. Then you might not connect as much with the cup. And when you look at to get more clarity in the cup, it's simple. When you're brewing coffee and you're dissolving different compounds dissolve at different rates. When you extract more of your coffee, you're not just like following the same linear extraction, you just have all the compounds that get dissolved later in the extraction process. And so if you want to have more clarity, the fewer compounds you have, the more clarity you have. If you start to have a whole bunch of different compounds, so the ones that get extracted early on, so the acids, the salts, and then maybe like more like sweeter compounds in the middle, and then the polyphenols, the sort of like more bitter, dry compounds towards the end. If you have that big spread, then you'll taste everything in the cup, and you don't have any clarity.
Right.
If you manage to narrow that spectrum of what you extract, you have way more clarity. So your coffee tastes like less things, but then it's easier to spot these things.
Right.
So then it means that it's easier for people to connect with. And so this is something that this is actually, I give you a bit of a spoiler, this is my theme for the World Championship. So we'll talk about clarity, we'll talk about like shortening the extractions, and this is something that I've been working on for about 2 years now, trying to refine that process, and I've had phenomenal results and feedback from people that could connect more with coffee and appreciate coffee more by just narrowing what we're serving in the cup.
Awesome. And I wasn't going to give the other competitors a sneak peek into what your routine might look like, but given that clarity is going to be the theme, is there anything that you wish to say in closing in terms of what that looks like on the competition stage, in terms of how you arrive at that conclusion, as to what you put into the routine itself, as to how you construct it in your head going into the Worlds, and what that routine looks like?
A lot of the whole routine, or the way I'm approaching it, and that's, I guess, like something I've been trying to do for many years, is I'm going to try to make things sound as simple as possible. So I'm really going to try to oversimplify everything. And so I want anybody to be able to watch that routine. Whether you speak English or not, whether you work in coffee or not, I want everyone to be able to connect with it. So it will be visual. And I'll try and use terms that are as simple as possible.
Nice.
I know it's going to annoy some people that, want to be extremely complex and scientific with coffee and be extremely precise with terminology, but I also think that that's not how we get more people in coffee. I think sometimes we just need to have that vulgarization of the product in order to simplify it more and then bring more people into that. So I want to be that person who is able to make coffee sound a little bit more simple, and then also just brings more people into it.
And I think that's a terrific approach, and that's kind of the approach that we take here in our cafe, where we kind of like to say that we want to bring competition coffee to the world, one guest at a time as they walk in our door, by making them feel seen, heard, and welcomed. But we base that on the qualities, or the pillars of hospitality, education, 100%. And quality. But we reverse engineer it, because we know we're always going to give them something of high quality, but they may not be familiar with what a Wish Wish is, or what a Catura Castillo is. They just want coffee. So we want to educate them about that in a hospitable way, to where they can understand it, and they can always leave more educated about coffee than they walked in. But we don't want to be pretentious about it, and we just want to simplify it, because at the end of the day, coffee is timeless, and it's just something that we can enjoy, come together to consume, and it's probably the most communal beverage out there in the world, and it's social currency. So it's awesome to be able to share that on the world stage in a competition form, and it's also just as exciting to share that in a cafe space like this one. But with that being said, Simon, we'll end this since we have to get into our water workshop, but I'll let you give a brief rundown of exactly what the different aspects of your core Apex is.
Yeah, so what we do is we've made different recipes, we've made different mineral profiles with different mineral content and composition inside each one to do a really targeted job. And so often when we're making coffee, we might want to make it more acidic, and so we've designed a profile that makes coffee more acidic. So that highlights the brightness, the juiciness, the vibrancy of coffee. And so all of these profiles can be used pre-brew into your brewing water, or also post-brew. That's probably a topic for another conversation. But whether you're adding minerals pre-brew or post-brew makes little to no difference at all. Which means that as a barista behind the bar, I can make a coffee, taste it before serving it, and then if it's not exactly how I want, then I get to make some adjustment afterwards. And that's kind of like post-editing, like you're shooting a photo, the photo looks good, but then you want to improve that photo, and then you do your editing afterwards. And so that's how we design the products.
Nice.
And so we have another one that's more focused on body and sweetness, and another one that's focused on silkiness, elegance, and highlighting floral notes in coffee. And so we create formulas that are intuitive for people to use, in a way that you're not really focused on, am I using a light roast or dark roast? Like, I want you to be like, I'm brewing this coffee. Do I want more acidity? Yes, I'm using that one. Do I want more sweetness? I am using that one. I think it's just much easier for people to know
100%,
which one to use, and I want people to rely more on their intuition rather than on complex science that only a few people can do.
100%. And I was going to say they're super intuitive to use.
I'm glad.
Always
to hear
terrific
that.
results, and I've used pretty much everything out there, and the Apex definitely has a special place in my travel arsenal as well. I just recently spent 21 days in Portland, and all three of these guys came with me. So it's definitely a phenomenal product, and I'm happy that we have it out there, and I'm also happy to see it on the competition stage. and also showing up in forums like this where you're curating some special formulas for various profiles to replicate that. So it's awesome to see Nemo's pop up. And tell everybody where they can get this.
So all of our products are available here at Goldchild if you're in San Diego. If you're in the US, Slow Pour Supply is our distributor. So they retail our products on the website, but also for wholesale, they have a wholesale program available. And all around the world, we have resellers in 90 countries now. So on apaxlab.com, you can find all of them. If I can find one nearby, or directly on our website as well.
Awesome. Well, Simon, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'm happy to get into this water workshop, brother.
This is going to be
and
good.
We're going to have a good time, and we will talk to you guys later.
All right, thank you.